Cool. So we're going to get started here now. First of all, I wanted to welcome all of you to Pinterest. My name is John Egan, and I'm an engineering manager on the growth team specifically for emails and notifications. So to start off, I wanted to kind of get a sense how many people this was their first time attending our growth engineering meetup. Raise your hand. Okay, cool. A good number. So one thing we like to do to start off all these meetups is kind of get a sense of who's in the audience by polling the audience. So if you're an engineer or have an engineering background, can you raise your hand? Okay, good number of engineers. Now, how about product managers? Any product managers? Any marketing people? Few. Designers? Couple. All right, cool. And how many people work at like a small company or startup with less than 10 people? All right. How about less than 100? All right. More than 100 people? Cool. Seems like a pretty even mix. So to start off, our first speakers tonight are going to talk a little bit about how Pinterest uses machine learning to drive growth. And our first speaker is Uku. He is a machine learning engineer on the growth team here at Pinterest. And Seth, who is the product manager for emails and notifications here at Pinterest. So please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, John. So as John mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about how we use machine learning to power our notification stream and really personalize it for everyone. You know, there's a lot of talk about the holy grail of getting people the right message at the right time on the right channel to drive engagement. And we're doing some really, really neat things driven by machine learning that have had a substantial effect on our growth. So we wanted to share a little bit of that today. For anyone who doesn't know, Pinterest is a global catalog of ideas where people can discover ideas, save them to collections on our product, and then we want them to do them in the real world. Overall, Pinterest is growing very rapidly. We have over 100 million users and 50 billion pins. That means we have a ton of ideas. A lot of people think about Pinterest and they think of recipes or DIY, home decor, and that's definitely there. But there's everything. There's people collecting Hot Wheel cars from the 70s or you know, quotes about socially relevant activists. So with all of these different ideas, it becomes a real challenge to know what's going to be interesting to people and how do we connect them with the personal content that's really going to improve their lives and help them use our product. Ultimately, Pinterest is really about the future. People use it for thinking about what they want to do. A lot of social networking is about what's happening now or what's recently happened. Pinterest is about what I want to do in the future. But that also means Pinterest is a very personal product. It's about me. So a lot of companies can rely on one-to-one social communications for driving their growth. We have a very different problem. What we have is an incredible corpus of content that we want to connect people with. Rather than having that social connection to rely upon that, hey, David is your friend and this is what he's done, we instead connect you with the interesting content that you might like. So pins, boards, pinners, topics, or searches. We think about cutting those in a lot of different ways. You know, it can be personal content, it can be similar to things you've done or popular trending, and then of course diverse content to help you explore that catalog of ideas. When we cut these all up, we get dozens of different notification types we can potentially send. And we have to figure out what to send to you, when to send to you, and on the right channel. Now, if I just look at my own history, we send everything from ideas for a board I've been acting on, to a specific idea I've recently been engaging with through search, broad content that applies, you know, that might be interesting to explore, or diverse recommendations that are specifically for me, but really hit on a lot of different topic areas. So how do we decide what we're going to send? Well, we really look at each person's intent, what they've done in the past, right? Like, hey, you like this type of notification, or you like this via push. We also look at what we want to see the person do, right? Our desired actions. Do we want to see them interacting more with boards? Do they need to find a new topic to interact with? And we take all of this, we put it into our machine learning models. We have some business rules that help guide our decision making on what to deliver to someone. And then we connect them with that right message on the right channel at the right time. Uku's going to talk a little bit about how we technically do that. And I'll pass it off to Uku.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Oh, don't forget my beer.
So let's start with the right time. So for a given email that we would like to send, the goal is to find the best hour of the day to send that email. I mean, intuitively, the timing of the message should be important. But to understand this a bit better, we looked at how long it takes for our users to click on the email after they are sent. So on the x-axis, we see the hours after the email was sent, and on the y-axis, we see the number of emails that were clicked on after that number of hours. As we can see, the most of the clicks arrive on the first day. And if we zoom into the first day, we actually see that about 50% of all clicks arrive in the first a few hours. So based on this, if we can identify the right time, we should be able to increase our click-through rates. So how do we do that? So our first intuition was to consider the user's local time and make sure that we send the emails at those local times that maximizes the click-through rate. So for that, we have this chart. We converted the send times to the user's local time and looked at the click rates in these local hours. So certainly, some hours have higher click rates than the others. And in this solution, basically, we make sure that we send emails at local hours that has the highest click-through rate. Even this basic solution gave us about 5% lift in CTR. And right now, we are in the process of further personalizing the send times based on the user's engagement with emails historically and adapt to their preferences. So now let's talk about the right message. So at Pinterest, we have more than 200 different email types, and these could be some legal emails, transactional emails, like editorial emails and recommendation emails. And as Seth mentioned, our focus is on identifying the best recommendation email types for a given user. And the end goal we have is to make sure that we personalize the cadence of these messages so that the users who like certain emails, I mean, the emails, the ones that they like are sent more often, and the ones they don't really engage with are sent a bit less. So that is the idea with personalizing the cadence. So before defining the problem a bit more formally, let's define what we mean by engagement. So with engagement, we mean if the email is going to get a click or not. So that is our definition, but it could be anything else. And our goal is to be able to predict engagement or click probabilities for a given user for a given email type. So because if we can accurately predict those probabilities, we can personalize the cadence. So the intuition is if the click probability is too low, we can choose to send those emails less often. And if the engagement probability is too high, we can send those emails more often because apparently the user likes this type of emails. So the problem is how can we compute these probabilities? So that seems to be the core of this problem. So for that, we use machine learning techniques. In our setup, we use pretty standard setup for these kind of problems. We train logistic regression model for each email type. And in this framework, we have basically two time windows. One is response time window, and the other one is the feature time window. So any email that we send to our users in the response time window becomes an example. So if that email was clicked on at least once, we consider that example to be a positive example. And any email that wasn't clicked on is a negative example to learn from. And for the recipients of those emails, we create some signals from the feature time window, which could be like a few months or 3 months, something like that. So we create these signals or features for those users. And with the machine learning models, we are trying to learn the importance of these signals to predict future click. So what kind of features do we create? So for a given user, we consider the country and the gender. And more importantly, We consider their historical engagement with the emails and how often they open the emails, how often they click on the emails, etc. And we do that for each email type that they receive. And if they opened or clicked, we create some recency features to capture, was that a recent event or was that like a long time ago? And we also have some generic engagement features. So are these users core users or casual users, etc.? Because knowing their engagement level at Pinterest helps us make our predictions more accurate. So with the machine learning model, essentially we are learning the importance of these signals to predict if they will click on a given email type or not. So our first use case we tried was lowering the cadence. And the intuition is, again, if the user is very unlikely to engage or click on the email, we should send that email a bit less often. So that's the idea, and that's the experiment we ran. So in this setup, we basically scored all the users using the model we just created, and we ranked them. And then in this setup, if the user falls into bottom 10%, 20%, etc., we just lower the cadence. So we decide not to send, and we just filter that email. And more specifically, in this experiment, we tried 3 different configurations. Tried different thresholds to filter 10%, 20%, and 35% of the emails. And we compared the clicks that we saw in the control group. And with these thresholds, we saw that only about 1% of the clicks were being actually lost, even if we sent 35% less emails. I mean, to get a sense, if we randomly filtered these emails, like 35% of the emails, we would lose like 35% of the clicks. So this is making a good decision on which emails not to send. And on the right, we have a screenshot from our internal dashboard. We also monitored if there was a drop in core metrics like DAUs, WAUs, etc. And then we saw pretty much no impact. So sending less emails to these users who don't engage with this email had pretty much no impact on the core metrics. So next, our main question was how to generalize this solution to all recommendation emails. So for that, I need to give you a quick simplified version of our original messaging system. So in this system, we make sure that each email is sent once a day. So we don't send more than a day. And to find out which email type to send, it goes through a fixed list of emails. So it could be in this order based on some global metrics. So for a given user, on the first day, it says personalized pins, and then it can send that email that day. And another feature of this system is once it makes sure that it doesn't send the same email type for the next 7 days. So in other words, it cools down that email type for a week, right? Just to improve the user experience. So on the next day for that user, when the system wakes up, it says, oh, personalized pins, I just sent that email yesterday, I cannot send it, and moves on to the next one, and maybe sends the interest recommendation email. So that is the basic round robin kind of system. It's still, I think, gives pretty good user experience because you are getting diverse set of emails, and we don't overwhelm the users. It is restricted for 1 email a day, right? So the question is how we can integrate these model or engagement scores into the system. So first, instead of going over the emails in that fixed order, we now rank the emails for that user. So basically, each email type is competing against each other, right? So we pick the email type that has highest score for that user. And second change is instead of using a fixed cooldown for every email type, we now dynamically compute the ideal cooldown. So if the score is really high, we decide maybe the cooldown should be 3 days, not like 7 days. Or if the score is too low, we should maybe cool down for a month. So now we basically dynamically decide the cooldown. After that, we check if this email is eligible for the user. If so, we send it. If not, we move on to the next highest email type. So let me clarify that even in this setup, we make sure that we don't send more than one email a day. It is just changing the cooldowns so that we make sure that the email types are competing against each other, and we are picking the right email type for the user. So so given this integration, we ran our next experiment and used these scores to increase the cadence. Again, the intuition is if the user is very likely to engage with certain types of emails, we should send those email types more often. And in this setup, again, we ranked, we sorted like all the users based on their scores, and we only targeted top 20% of the users. So if your score is really high, we would change the cadence for you and send those emails a bit more often. So with that, we increased our emails by 20%. In this configuration, basically, we sent 20% more emails, but those emails generated more than 70% clicks. Again, if we were to randomly add emails, like 20% emails, this would generate about 20% more clicks, but we are seeing these users actually really like their emails. And on the dashboard, we saw that actually this resulted in pretty good gains on the core metrics, and DAUs and other metrics were up. So some last note about the technologies we used in this project. We use cascading jobs and Hive queries to create features, labels, and all the training examples. And we use Spark to train our models and also score the users. All these workflows are fully automated, and we are actually able to refresh the models periodically without any manual effort. They wake up and refresh like every few weeks. And we do the scheduling using Pinball, which is a scheduler built at Pinterest and which is open source. Yeah, those are the basic technologies we use. Yeah, that's it.
So we have 5 minutes for Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Yeah.
If you can talk about it, how much does time factor into things like when you're grouping those? If someone is active and then I know they're having a baby, they're not quite so active for a week. How much do you factor activity over time?
So the question is how the activity on the site or in general? I mean, these models have features to capture their activities over a long time. So depending on how much they engage with what types of emails or what they do on Pinterest, all factor into our predictions, basically.
Yeah. Just the bias on that for recency, or do we just look evenly over time?
So recency is a very important factor. So if you recently clicked on certain types of emails, that would be more important than if you clicked them in the past. So even if your click rates are the same, if the user's engagement was recent, their scores would be higher, definitely.
If I can continue, does that mean you can make like a prediction in general based on how much?
Yeah. So basically, we also have some reports that checks the accuracy of our predictions. So we look at our predicted engagement versus the actual engagement. So those rates are, I mean, for the outliers, they are a bit off, but like for the majority, they are pretty accurate. Yeah.
You apply a similar structure to push-ups, and in particular, like categorizing them in certain categories and having like the one per day or not one of the same type.
Basically, yeah. And we're developing the system to be much more advanced with that and be very nuanced in which channel we choose and how we choose it. Yeah.
Basically, the idea is then to adapt to the channel that you prefer. Yeah.
In the back. Yeah. Yeah. So the question was, people will turn off notifications and have basically a fast trigger finger to disable them. So how do we ensure we're sending the right content and good content? And that's been a major effort over the last year to make the notifications far more relevant to you and personal to you. And that's part of this cooling down as well, and filtering out the bottom percentage. So if you're not interacting, we really look at, like, should we be sending? How do we make sure if you're interacting with the product but not interacting with push, how do we stop sending push? Because you don't need that to be engaged, or you've illustrated through your actions you don't need that to be engaged. So that's all of the, like, sending less to the people who aren't engaged, and then we focus on sending more to the people who really like that content. And then we work a lot on the content itself to make it highly relevant. And we've made real great strides on that. Maybe a great presentation for another growth meetup.
So this model looks like it's promoting more usage by people who are already highly engaged. So how does it take care of people who are, like, dropping their engagement? It seems like this model will stop sending them more emails. Would that be counterproductive?
So these models, I mean, the idea with this solution is to adapt to your preferences. If you like certain things, you will get them more. If you don't like, you will get them less. But from the business perspective, if we are losing those users, it's actually counterintuitive. So we should actually target them more. But for this product, it's purely based on pinner experience. So improved pinner experience. Yeah, and actually we also segment the users by their state. So as we cool down, the decisions we make depend on the segment as well. So if you are a core user, like, your bar is really high versus, like, a casual user, right? So if you are very engaged, you have to be really engaged with the email to get them more often.
That's it. We're out of time. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. So next up, we have Alex from Yelp, who will be presenting. He's the engineering manager on the growth team at Yelp. And over the past year, they've kind of built out their growth team from scratch. So he's here today to share a little bit about what that process was like and some of what they learned along the way.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I'm Alex Hafner. I've been at Yelp for 3 years. A year and a half of that has been building growth at Yelp. So I wanted to give you kind of an overview of what that was like, some of the challenges we faced, and some of the things that went well for us. So today I broke it down into 3 sections. We're gonna talk about the early Yelp growth team and how we structured that. One of the major areas that we ran into as a problem was increasing our team experiment throughput. So that's kind of the second area we're gonna talk about. And then lastly, like, taking a step away and figuring out how we decided to strategize our growth team. So if you don't know about Yelp, the mission is to connect people with great local businesses, and we're a hugely mobile company. 90 million unique monthly visitors come to us via mobile. We have 102 million reviews on businesses all over the world. 70% of our searches are done on mobile devices, and we're out in 32 countries. So starting off with Yelp's growth team, it was formed in 2015, about a year and a half ago. We took engineers from across a bunch of different teams. We brought together mobile, web, backend, every discipline that we had. Since then, we've run over 100 experiments across all of our platforms: web, email, web apps, email, and push. Today, the team focuses mostly on mobile user acquisition, onboarding, and email and push. We also have a separate traffic and ITN team. They do SEO and international growth, respectively. So when we started the team, like I said, we put web, backend, iOS, and Android engineers together with PMs, designers, and data scientists. And what we realized pretty quickly was we didn't have enough PMs, designers, or data scientists on the team. What you'll find if you try to build a growth team is it's pretty amazing the amount of product work that you require to do well. We initially focused on 3 major areas: app installs, our onboarding funnels, mostly for the apps, and then emails and other re-engagement techniques. And everything we did was an experiment. So with that in mind, I think I wanted to start with, like, where we started, which was, we started with onboarding, and this was our first onboarding experiment. This is what it looked like in 2014. And we had the location permission prompt, some splash that didn't really tell you too much, and then a sign up screen, and then you were on this page that gives you local recommendations based on where you are. to make Yelp successful, location permission is obviously like the first part, because we're amazing when we know where you are and we can give you great stuff. And if we don't know where you are, it's a lot harder. So we ran 4 cohorts. The winning cohort in this experiment, the first experiment we ever ran for growth, was just adding a prompt ahead of our location permission prompts. And it was super basic. It took like a few days at max to run, and it gave a pretty big boost in location permission prompts. From there, we ran a bunch of different experiments. So we started ramping up our experiments. We run a mobile release cycle where we release our app every 2 weeks, and we were getting an iteration of an experiment in every release. This was one of the early lessons we learned a few versions after what I showed there. We wanted people to opt in to push notification permission. We wanted to figure out how to get that better than what we had, and we tried out this full screen prompt that asked you to do it, and it had a skip button on it. And what we saw is most people clicked the skip button, which obviously we didn't want. And we wanted people to click on that grant notification permission button that's really big. So in the next app release, we just removed the skip button and ran it, and nobody tapped the grant notification permission button. They just left the app. So lesson learned. If you see our experiments now, one of the things that we always try to do is give people an opportunity to say they don't want something. And those are really powerful signals, so keep that in mind. So after about 1.5 years of onboarding, one of the major areas that we focused in on, we learned a lot. And one of the major things for us was we bring our experiment results cross-platform. So we try not to run the same experiment on both platforms, because it lets us run twice as many experiments. The other thing is, when Android rolled out their location permission, it was really easy for us to replicate that, because we've already tested it on iOS, and mostly what we tested on iOS worked very similar on Android. It doesn't always work that way, so you have to test a little bit here and there. But for a lot of cases, it does. We had to get creative to avoid local maxima. So with onboarding and any funnel, I think you can get like really into that funnel and optimize the heck out of it, and then you might have hit the local maxima on what you can do. And so we try to take some steps back and think about what we're really trying to do. I think this onboarding that's animated is a good example of that. There's no user interaction to get through all of onboarding, and we just wanted to focus on getting people through and see how that did for us. And the last thing, which should be pretty obvious, is focus on your key metrics. If you do something for a long time and you're optimizing funnels, it can be tempting to look at other metrics, but just focus in and you'll do really well. So the second thing that I wanted to talk about was scaling team experiment throughput. We, at this point, we're running a lot of onboarding experiments. We're starting to run experiments on other parts like app acquisition, email, and we were running into this problem that our experiments were not being analyzed. So we had a bunch of experiments running, and they hadn't made a decision on them. At one point, we had like 25 or 30 experiments just sitting out there waiting for someone to make a decision on them. We had third-party tools that weren't matching our analysis needs, and we were also struggling to share our experiments with our team. So I'm going to go through all 3 of these and kind of how we approach them. The first one was we made a very interesting decision to switch from having data scientists be responsible for analyzing our experiments to engineers being responsible for that analysis. And we went really hands-on with the team of engineers, did a lot of statistics training, null hypothesis, significance testing, Bayesian testing, other things. We did some sessions with BigQuery, SQL, Redshift, and brown bags on iPath and Notebook. It wasn't maybe the most intuitive thing to do, and I wouldn't say that every engineer wants to be a data scientist, but I think overall, like for us, this really helped us improve our experiment analysis. The second thing was we invested in better tooling. So our data scientists, instead of working on the most base level experiments that we're going to run pretty frequently, just built us tools that we can use to do that. Python packages to query our data storage, and most of our experiment analysis hopefully is one line of code. For the most complicated things we run, we might pass it over to a data scientist. And the last thing was when we were trying to share all this knowledge, we moved to a common experimentation document format. Might not seem like a big deal, but it actually changed a lot of how our team and other teams at Yelp communicate about experiments. So like now multiple teams use the same format, and when you want to understand what someone else is doing, you can just go check that out. It helps to share knowledge. I think one of the most important things with running experiments is not just to hit those metric goals, but also to make sure that you're growing some intuition about what works and what doesn't. It also supports comment and review. We still have a challenge that we have trouble collating information across similar experiments. So when we run, onboarding for a year and there's a bunch of experiments there, it can be challenging for us to sort of roll that all up. So lastly, wanted to close with, we started running experiments. We figured out how to run a lot more. But at the high level, when we were thinking about like kind of how to get the team to be successful, there were a couple of major things for us. we wanted to bring our wins cross-platform, like I mentioned. Always build the MVP. It seems kind of obvious. For us, we had a forcing function. Every 2 weeks, we had a new app release, and if you miss that app release, you miss the next 2 weeks. So we always tried to cut the product down to a 2-week change, every experiment, with the goal of getting into that next mobile release. Mobile's super unique, could go into that for a while. We place a lot of little bets and a few big bets. This one and the next one I'll talk about just a little bit. We test new areas for growth. There's a phrase, I think, from good to great or something. It's like fire bullets, then cannons. Basically, like, I think it's kind of important that when you find some interesting area, you make a big bet on it. When you're optimizing funnels all the time, it's gonna, you'll be successful, but it's definitely like super important to make those big bets that could totally change things for you. One example for us is we made a big bet on embedded reviews. We looked at content of Yelp and seeing it on other sites, and it wasn't embedded. And so now you can go to yelp.com, take any review, take an HTML snippet, paste it into your site, and we are actually there on pages. So just an example of making that big bet. You never know where your next opportunity for growth is going to be, but if you're optimizing funnels all the time, you may never find it. So yeah, just a quick summary. We started growth with cross-platform engineers, and they were not like super special stats majors who could totally tell you how to run the best experiment. But we invested in our team. Stats and experiment analysis was one of our best investments. And I think, like, when you have somebody who understands how to build and then analyze your experiment, the quality of the overall experiment is much higher. Like, the number of issues that you run into lowers. The quality of the experiment, I think, goes up. We definitely saw that. The caveat is it's a different model than a traditional engineering team. And we try to optimize those funnels and place those big strategic bets. So I think that's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about growth. And that's pretty much all I got. I got a few minutes for questions. Any questions? Yeah.
Do you run experiments in parallel, or do you do one at a time, or do you read different variations?
Sure. Do we run experiments in parallel? Yeah, we do. It's like a whole topic that we could go into. We run a lot of experiments in parallel across different parts of the product, and depending on where in the product, we try to minimize interactions. We work on some internal tools to tag which part of the products it affects. We also have ways to bucket such that, like, you don't interact with another experiment. Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you manage to communicate to other teams, all the discoveries you made?
How do we manage to communicate? Like,
tell everybody that we learned this great.
Yeah. So we have this. How do we communicate what we're learning to other teams at Yelp? So we have a document format. We have mailing lists. We use our mailing lists. We also have a once weekly meeting with all of engineering and can share some stuff there if it's really interesting. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you guys balance like having like the dedicated growth PM, growth designer that like knows the ins and outs of growth design versus getting into, you said you went cross-platform, and getting into like the nuances of meaning on it?
Sure. Yeah. The question is kind of how do you balance having like a dedicated growth PM designer when you want to make cross-platform versus like having people go deep on one particular area? I think, yeah. So I think that the answer to that is it's all about staffing. If you have enough designers, you can have dedicated designers for particular areas. And if you don't, you got to work with what you got. I think that's a lot of like figuring out your team is what do you have to work with and what can you do? Like, we made the decision to train our team on analysis and data science and have them run experiments because of some of the constraints we were running into. Cool. Yeah.
So when you have like a backlog of like little experiments going on, how do you like prioritize? Like, okay, we're gonna run this one now, like this one next week.
Sure. Sure. The question is, how do we decide when we have a backlog of a bunch of small experiments, which ones to run? Yeah, I mean, we try to opportunity size them. I mean, we look at our key metrics and we try to figure out which of these is actually going to move them based on what we know. I'm sorry that's so vague, but that's all I got. Yeah. Do we have time for? Cool. Yeah. Sorry. I'm going right to left. Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious. What you mentioned, lots of little bets, but don't ignore your big bets.
Yeah.
What types of things do you look for after you've seen a little bit of success with those little bets?
So the question is like, balancing little bets and big bets. What makes you go after a big bet? What do you have to see to do it? I think for us, it's traction and then an opportunity to find a product that we think could build or could hit the level that we want. So it's kind of goal setting. If we don't think that we can build something that would hit the level we want with what we know, we wouldn't do it. Yeah.
Just to follow up, can you give an example of a big bet that you made that worked out really nicely?
The question is, can we give an example of a big bet that we made that worked out really nicely for us? Yeah, I can. It's a technical bet that we made. We moved all of our code into our own service to do personalization and email and push sending. It was a big bet. It's been a year and a half. We started a year and a half ago, but it's probably one of our most successful technical bets that we made because it's made us have huge leverage in pushing out code really quickly and being able to make changes. That one's less user facing, but that's one of the bigger bets that I can cite that worked out really well. The other ones are still coming out, so. Okay, one more question, yeah.
You said you did 100 experiments. What's
Yeah.
the bottleneck to doing 1,000 or 10,000? Is it engineering? Is it ideas?
Question is, we said we did around 100 experiments. What can we, why didn't we do 1,000? What's the bottleneck? There's a whole host of bottlenecks. So sorry for that. There's a ton of problems that we would need to solve, and I think we expose them as we go up. So you can't just go from 100 to 1,000 on day one. We'll go from 100 to 500, and then we'll realize we have a problem, fix those problems, and then get to 1,000. Cool.
Thanks.
All right. So our final talk tonight, we have a couple speakers from Dropbox, and they're going to talk about their communication platform and some of the challenges they face in sending out notifications and communications to over 500 million users. So we have Ruchi, who's an engineering manager on the Growth Platform team, and also Aditi, who's a product manager on the Growth Platform team. So please give them a warm welcome.
Oh, how do we make ours default? Bear with us. Yeah. Switching tabs.
Oh, maybe it's the tab, yeah.
Cool. I'm Aditi, and this is Ruchi.
Hi, I'm Ruchi.
So for today, we're going to just cover who are we, which I think John gave a good intro for us, to what is Growth Platform at Dropbox, and Ruchi's going to dive into example wins that we've had, as well as some learnings about building a more platform-oriented approach to our communications. So, hello. So what do we mean when we say growth platform? For us, our mission statement is to build the megaphone for us to reach hundreds of millions of customers. And why is this important? It's because, as John mentioned, we have 500 million users on Dropbox, and more importantly, not all users are alike. There's a spectrum of individual consumers using it for personal use cases to prosumers who are like freelancers and more creative types who are using it with other clients, all the way to large enterprises using Dropbox and people interested in bringing Dropbox to their workplace. And so the variety of users and archetypes causes us to have to create multiple different customer journeys that we really need to be able to message in a more scaled way and across a lot of different teams. So what we actually have built at Dropbox is what we call Megaphone, which is a unified communication platform that provides these different sets of functionality to other teams at Dropbox, growth teams, product teams, marketing teams, revenue teams, to actually leverage this to reach users on different types of channels. And so the three channels that we consider important are in-app, so this is like when you're on Dropbox.com on the web or in our mobile app right now, you can see messages and campaigns that we target to you. 2 is push notifications on mobile as well as desktop, where we have Windows and Mac clients. And 3rd is email, which is more passive and really effective for mass communications as well as reaching users who may not be as active or coming to the app. So in terms of functionality, like we really think about campaigns from four realms, which is really making it easy to create campaigns with templates, creating drip campaigns via tracks. 2 is targeting, thinking about how do we identify who should receive a message and when. 3 is providing A/B testing to make it easier, and being really clear about bringing analysis into our tools. So in terms of this platform, it's a lot, and it's been a long journey for us to actually build it. Some of the design principles that we used when we started out were here. So number 1, our original goal is to make it easy for non-technical users to actually drive growth and engagement campaigns. At a company like Dropbox, which is now like 1,500 people, there's a lot of different teams who want to drive like growth and engagement across all these different customer types. And so we wanted to make it so that you're not just doing one-off experiments, and make it so that multiple teams could iterate on these campaigns. 2, for us is really important to leverage our user data pipeline, which we all have in a Hive cluster. And so that really pushed the urgency for us to design something internally versus like seeking out third-party tools. And the last piece was the benefit of going to a more platform approach versus a more one-off experimentation approach is the fact that you can enforce standard designs across different campaigns. So this is like really beneficial like in our app when we can really control like, there's 5 different types of campaigns that we can run. There's banners, there's other types of like locations, and really standardize what the user experience is and make sure that people don't receive multiple campaigns. So with that intro, you're just gonna dive.
Hey everyone. Yeah, so we've put a lot of effort into building out that platform. So why build something when you're not going to get something out of it? And so through our growth platform, we've been able to sort of drive a lot of wins across onboarding, engagement, and monetization. And I wanted to share some of those with you. So yeah, one of the biggest things is that, Dropbox has a business product, and, it's not only the end user who's trying to put files into Dropbox, it's the person on the other end who's trying to organize, set permissions, and figure out access controls and stuff like that. So, one of the efforts that we did was to actually build out a perfectly A/B testable drip campaign for onboarding these team admins. And, basically, we were at a point in time where we were writing one-off scripts to just send a series of emails. But now with the platform, it's able to sort of set up a series of campaigns with just time delays and A/B test full sort of track experiences. And then going on, so that was an onboarding example. But then there's a lot of engagement-related things, and what we were able to do was straight up from our analytics pipeline. We were able to set up an entire feature that sort of touches a lot of the engagement aspects. So it's like an activity digest of what happened in your folder. And this happened all without the necessity for any engineer to write any code. This was set up by a PM on the team who works on shared folders, and they were able to sort of write the right Hive queries that were needed and set up a recurring job that would populate this email and send it out to everyone. And then going next, money is always a big deal, right? And so one of the biggest things that we've been able to do is expand sort of the platform, not only to email or a web sort of experience, it's going all the way down to a mobile experience and making that mobile experience also A/B testable, the desktop experience also to A/B testable. So, on the left side, you see an iOS upsell for, running out of space. It's like one of the biggest paywalls in the Dropbox atmosphere. And so basically what you would do is, you would be able to, as a marketing expert of a user segment at Dropbox, you'd be able to set up this type of campaign and be able to A/B test different copy, different colors, see how people are reacting. And through the analytics part of the platform, you'd be able to observe results and decide whether people are reacting the right way to this. Similarly, on Windows, we were able to provide persistent notifications to users on Windows. And so, again, this entire experience is completely controllable and A/B testable from the server side. And yeah, that's an example from the web where we do an upsell. Cool. So some learnings. Definitely, it's easy to sort of, from our engineering sense, try to build out an entire system, think of overbuilding it, generalize a lot of things. But it's always easier to just take one channel at a time and sort of figure out which channel has the most impact, and then figure out what are the patterns, what are the aspects that matter. So things like rate limiting are different for emails. So something that Ukta mentioned about, which was like, how do you have different categories? How are you able to provide cool-offs and stuff like that? Which might be a very different experience when it comes to notifications, because notifications are way more sensitive. And so definitely tackling one channel at a time is kind of the way to go. And then when you start observing patterns that are very similar, so things like analytics or campaign creation or internationalization, like those are lots of common aspects that apply to emails, they apply to in-app messages, and they apply to notifications. So you can start to commonize those layers out once you've sort of done them one at a time. Yeah, so it's like, this is kind of our approach that we took. We took from email, where we were writing one-off scripts, and then we made it ready for sort of mass email campaigns. Then we decided to take a look at our in-app experiences. And then we went to our notifications channel, where now it's sort of possible to set up a notification experiment in 2 hours, while before it was just impossible to deal with all the different clients, which was Windows and iOS and Android and even Mac. So, with Dropbox, I think having the desktop experience is something that not very many companies have to deal with. And with great power comes great responsibility. So it's like easy to sort of do growth hacks that make growth numbers sort of go up and to the right, but you almost have to think about at what cost, right? So like, are people turning off notifications? Are people unsubscribing from emails? And so having a quality metric to balance against your growth metric is really important. So, for example, like we do a measurement of our desktop pushability, and that means sort of what's the percent of clients who have turned off notifications and are unreachable. So that's something that we track as well. That's it. So talk to us, reach out to us, and we're happy to take questions.
So if anybody can add new campaigns, new features, and whatnot without code changes, how do you keep everybody at Dropbox from just stampeding? And could you and maybe Dropbox is a little bit bigger, so there's a team dedicated to each part of the funnel, but do you have any tips or suggestions for smaller companies where it's like,
Yeah, this is a very timely topic for us and constantly evolving. We have official approval systems for all the channels, and so literally someone has to go and approve campaigns that are submitted. And originally it was our engineering team that did that, because when you build a platform, you're really the first designer of it, and people don't necessarily understand the power of it either. So there's definitely a learning curve for new features that you put out for the company. So we were doing it, and then we realized that doesn't scale, especially for channels like email, where people really get it and are it's super tangible. So we have partners on the marketing team who are kind of channel owners right now, who are make sure that they think about channel quality and have metrics reporting and things like that. But again, I feel like that's an area that's always understaffed, and there's definitely a lot more that we could be doing in terms of onboarding people onto it, documentation, and this becomes a whole product that you have to support and really promote. And so that's definitely a challenge with having a platform, but I think it's a good challenge where people react very positively to seeing wins, and then they want to also drive campaigns through it. So it makes the company better.
To add to that, actually, there's a lot of that can actually be solved from a technical standpoint. That's why things like rate limiting and controlling of the UX experience and having inbuilt controls, which are smart in the system, go to a good extent into making sure that if 10 people are writing email campaigns, not all of them are going to the user at the same time. Yeah.
How do you, so if, with Megaphone, you've made it basically so that anybody at the company more or less can design and send out an experiment. Well, we just learned from the Yelp talk that post-experiment, it's important to be able to like have the stats background and or training to do the analysis over the experiment. So if like him, a designer, or whoever decides to send an experiment into the ether, are they then responsible for analyzing and presenting the results, or does it go to a separate like data analytics team? Or does everyone at the company have stats training? I don't know.
Yeah, good question. So the question was that, if it's open to non-technical users, are they expected to know stats and analysis to be able to understand the impact of their campaigns? And that's a good question. And so, that's why it's really important for us to make it part of the system. So what we do is provide basic mechanisms for people to track standard metrics like email opens, clicks, click-through rates, and stuff like that. And then we pull in those analytics for them, given our back-end sort of email logging. And then to add to that, what we're working on more recently is to actually train people to do A/B testing, but by automating a lot of that for them. So it's like they just click on a button and it sets up a very standardized A/B test. And then if they are, aware of like what are the intricacies of doing an A/B test, they can go tweak those metrics all by themselves. But at least we give them the opportunity with a standardized template in many ways. Cool, go for it.
A lot of the history of the experimentation that everybody would be able to see that. Is that possible?
So the question was, could they see history of the experimentation? So is it on a per campaign basis or?
So I'm curious, like when you say like a cross campaign, let's say you have 1,000 campaigns, when the company results and start to drill into really effective.
Yep, that's exactly a great property of the system that we're actually looking to build that soon. But, as a platform, we have visibility into all the campaigns and we're able to track the analytics of all the campaigns, and then we'd be able to surface up campaigns that are performing really well across the company, and that becomes the platform for training other people to do it well.
So I think initially there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and then it kind of got harder and harder and harder. Do you think there's ever a point where you picked all the fruit and there's no more wins to be had, or will there always be opportunity?
So the question was, have we picked all our low-hanging fruit? That's never true. I wish we were at that point, so I don't know.
I would say that the world changes before that happens. So like new product launches, new like how we think about our business model, like changes, like how, and so like it always gets more complex. So I feel like I don't know if there's any company that has picked off all of low-hanging fruit.
Any more questions? Yep, go for it.
Does Megaphone help you guys typically segment? So can people say, hey, I think that they can put our use case and then run? Scenario?
Yeah, so the use cases are quite varied, and I think right now it's still a little bit like DIY, where it's kind of like there's a lot of people using the system, and the savvier users will have like better techniques, and so moving towards a more user segment orientation is something that we're definitely like trying to push more. And it's kind of like when you're designing a platform, as like a platform owner, you're responsible for setting up, like making sure people go down the right decision paths and making it easy to like see the path all the way through. And so segmentation is definitely something that's really top of mind for us going forward.
Thank you. All right, cool. So I wanted to thank all of you for coming. But to wrap up, I wanted to ask everyone to do one last thing. So first, please pull out your phone. All right, everyone has their phone out? Okay. Now close Pokemon Go. And go to your browser and type pin.it/growth. So with growth, an important aspect is always getting user feedback. And so we like getting user feedback about our meetup so we can help improve them. So if you go to that link, there's a 15-second survey. It's really quick, only 3 questions. Just take a minute to answer those questions to give us some feedback to help improve these. And then after that, we have time for drinks and mingling. We have to be out of here by 9 p.m., so we got about 50 minutes to hang out if you guys want to hang out. Thank you again for coming.